Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call the first meeting of the Mixed Use Zoning Ordinance Task Force to order. My name is Mary Ellen Gray. I'm the Planning and Community Development Director here at the City of Rehoboth Beach. And I would like to thank everybody for taking your time to volunteer to this very important issue of mixed use in the City of Rehoboth. I'd like to introduce our consultant, Nick Walls, who will be helping to facilitate this meeting and run this meeting, and he'll be presenting the PowerPoint presentation. And then, but before we do that, I would like to introduce the mayor, who wants to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you. I wanted to be here in person, number one, to see who's going to take the mayor's seat. Bob, you're the front and center there, and I'm surprised others of you haven't filled in here, for the best seats there. Listen, I want to thank you on behalf of the mayor and commissioners for your interest in this, and also for your time commitment and all that you're going to share with the group. This will be truly a group task force type of thing that'll give us, I think, the best or better result than with just the commissioners working on it or just the planning commission working on it. So again, I'll be short and sweet. Thank you all for being here, and I look forward to further reports that you have in your studies. That'll be individual reports, I think, in front of the Planning Commission and individual reports in front of the Board of Commissioners at some point. So thank you very much for your interest here.
All right. Good morning. Thank you, Mayor Mills and Marianne. Appreciate your introductions. And as they said, my name is Nick Walls. I'm a consultant with Wallace Montgomery and Associates. I've been assisting the city with their site plan reviews and providing input to various code updates, all that fun stuff, really. But today we're going to be focused on something that the 2020 update to the community development plan called for, which was integration of some mixed-use zoning into the commercial districts. And so let's get going. We'll take a quick look over the agenda here, and let me perhaps blow it up a bit so we can see it. So we've gone through the call to order. Introductions, we'll go around and just have you guys state your name and quickly say what sort of background you have while you're here. Then we'll get into the presentation, go through a little bit of overview on why we're here, what we're doing, what we hope to accomplish, and the process moving forward. Once we go through that, we'll have some discussion of the tenets that we're seeking to identify, have a free-range discussion, and then talk about our next meetings and what's coming forward. So before we get into the introductions, just want to go over some really basic ground rules with everybody. Number one, please, at any point, if anybody has questions, comments, anything that they want to discuss, just let us know. Raise your hand. We'll give you a chance to speak up while the moment is right. So don't hold back on anything. But we do ask that you wait until you're recognized. So just flag me down, and we'll call on you as soon as we can. Please also just let everybody finish their thought. Sometimes I know we want to interject if we have a opposite perspective or something, but just let them wrap up. And on that perspective, try and keep your thoughts and talk brief so that we have time for everybody to get through. Please just be respectful of one another. I mean, that's hopefully an obvious point, but when we deal with some contentious issues, a lot of people get passionate. So let's just try and keep everybody above board, and we'll move forward effectively. And along those same lines, just keeping a positive approach, not only to each other, but what we're doing here, what we're trying to accomplish for the city and with our charge. So one thing I like to discuss in general, anytime I have a public meeting of this nature where we're trying to develop something or review a proposal that's perhaps going to elicit different levels of responses, maybe some very oppositional perspectives, maybe a lot of agreement. A lot of times we hear about the word consent, or consensus rather, where we're trying to get everybody to agree on something. I can tell you that's incredibly rare and difficult to achieve. So thinking about it from that perspective, really what we're trying to seek here is consent. And that is something that we can all sort of agree to allow to have a chance to happen. But that agreement should be around a couple fundamental principles. One, is the proposal, is the element reasonable? Does it make sense on its surface? Does it address the intended goal? that we're trying to address? Do the majority, or not even the majority, do the bulk of the people on the task force and the populace, what have you, generally support the idea and concept? Is it within our scope, within the confines of what we are being tasked with addressing? And ultimately, is it something that you're willing to give a chance to see if it can be implemented and have the effect that we're intending? Keep in mind that a lot of times these pieces are going to go through a very, not lengthy, but a process that involves a lot of various input from people throughout the community. There's going to be changes, there's going to be revisions over time, but also once it's implemented, there's nothing to say that in the future, if something isn't working, it can't be revisited and revised to make it more applicable, more targeted, broadened, what have you, to address the real needs of the community if we don't get it right the first time. Because frankly, it's difficult to nail it 100% the first time. But we're going to do our best to do so. All right, so with that said, let's do some lightning quick introductions. You heard from myself, Mary Ellen. We're going to start up here at the dais with Patrick, please.
Patrick Gossett, one of the city commissioners.
Pomeranz. I built 48 Wilmington, which has been used as a model for mixed use somewhat. My background, CPA, expertise mostly banking, finance. I've been a developer primarily in Ocean City, and that's it.
I'm Jim Pritchett. I'm one of the homeowner representatives. My background is I spent most of my career with the State Department, part of it with Department of Justice. I'm an attorney, but did mostly immigration work with those.
Susan Gay, I'm currently a member of the Planning Commission. In fact, I was also a member of the Planning Commission back in 2019 when we held the first workshop on mixed-use development as part of the CDP. Served as a commissioner for 3 years, and then now, as I said, back on the Planning Commission.
Good morning, Dave Diefendorfer. I'm a city resident and I'm a degreed mechanical engineer, licensed professional engineer in fire protection, and I'm in the Civil Engineer Corps in the United States Navy Reserve for 32 years now.
Good morning. My name is Mark Saunders. I know most of you from my days in the Homeowners Association here in Rehoboth. And for the last couple of years, I've been on the Board of Adjustment, and now I got a promotion. I'm a commissioner.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Burton, and I am the property manager for the Commons and the Muse, Baltimore Avenue and Rehoboth Avenue for 17 years. My late father and mother developed it in the 70s. So I have an MBA and very interested in being a part of this.
Hi, I'm Rick Perry. I'm a resident of the city, and in terms of my relationship with the city, I too served on the Planning Commission along with Susan when we first started the development of the 2020 plan, and I now serve on the Board of Adjustment, and I'm fairly active in a lot of organizations here in the city.
I'm Jay LaGree. I spent 30 years in the military, and my name's on that CDP somewhere. I remember all the stuff we went through getting that thing out.
Good morning. I'm Steve Sheffer. I'm here representing Rehoboth Beach Main Street. I'm the chair of the Economic Vitality Committee, which is a little misleading. But basically, Rehoboth Beach Main Street is focused on promoting the city of Rehoboth Beach and all the good things about it. And I'm also a former commissioner and a proud resident since 2017.
Mike Fisher. I live in Wilmington, but I've owned a unit at the Henlopen condominium for 29 years. I've been on the council there for several years. I'm the current treasurer.
Okay, great, thank you. Evan, would you like to say hi? Sorry, I didn't mean to make you get up and everything.
Good morning, everyone. Evan Miller, I'm the Assistant City Manager. Thank you all for being here. We're looking forward to this task force and all that you'll accomplish, so thank you.
All right, we're going to jump in. So we've got a quick presentation. Again, please, if anybody has questions, anything, just wave your hand. We'll give you a chance to speak. All All right, so a little bit of background. There was initially, as Susan mentioned, a workshop in 2019 for the Planning Commission that went through some of these elements previously. And a lot of that discussion and elements were translated into the 2020 update of the CDP. So they looked at mixed uses both vertical and horizontally, targeting the current commercial districts, and also new and reconstruction. You know, can the code address mixed use as is? Were there any safety issues, economic issues? What would be the impact on the streetscape and the aesthetics, if you will? And then, you know, how could we integrate green technologies? Was there opportunity to do so within the code, or would that be left to the developers? So they also looked at various types of residential units, including apartments, condos, single and multifamily residential units, rentals of all different types, and then, of course, how would parking be addressed? That's always going to be a big issue that we're going to circle back to frequently, I believe. So some of the main goals that came out of that 2019 effort were the reliance on good design and architectural guidelines to help shape the mixed-use projects that would come forward. That was definitely a recurrent theme that we heard throughout not only this, but also the CDP update as we went through community engagement processes. My firm was also involved in that update process for the plan. Also wanted to look at maintaining and increasing the vibrancy of these locations, not just during the high visitor seasons, but throughout the year. And then looking forward, what are the trends for the next generation? Are they looking for larger, smaller residential units? What type of composition do we need to have in order to encourage them to locate here? And then when we get into the details of the mixed use, what type of incentives can we provide to help shape the elements that are proposed for these sites? Was there anything that we could do to reduce burdens for parking that would encourage those compositions? How about a floor area ratio? Were there elements we could address there? Promotion of green roofs and promoting a variety of housing were also some of the common themes too. So what are we actually doing here? What is our purpose? So as we mentioned before, the 2020 update to the CDP specified that we identify and implement mixed-use regulations within the zoning code that are targeted for the commercial development. And essentially, it's looking to encourage and permit infill and redevelopment of those commercial districts so that they have a variety of uses, but don't have any impact on the fundamental nature of the city, its aesthetic, its feel. We want to make sure that we're supporting and encouraging a variety of housing stock for all the ages and income levels. So we're not just looking at seasonal rentals, not just looking at workforce housing or anything high income, low income. We want a diverse assortment. So we also need to recognize that a lot of the city is pretty much built out, but they're built out with some, shall we say, older building structures and uses. And really, this is creating a target of sorts for development interests to invest money in the city and redevelop these sites. And we want to make sure that when they go through that process, that they have an opportunity to address their economic needs from the parcels, but in a way that supports the city and its goals, and that doesn't detract, but enhances what we have in place. So we're looking to develop regulations that allow for flexibility as we maintain the character and as we encourage the variety of housing stock. Those are fundamentally the big pieces. So what's the overarching process that we're going to use? Well, we created the task force, and that's sitting with all of us here today. We're going to have a couple of meetings at the early part to discuss and finalize the main tenets, which are the big overarching goals of this effort. We're going to then present those to the Planning Commission, get their input, present it to the Board of Commissioners, get their input as well, make some adjustments as necessary to them, and then using that framework, my team will begin to develop specific sets of regulations for the zoning code and we'll come back to this team and dive into them. You know, we're going to tease every word out, see what you think, see what needs to be strengthened, relaxed, integrated, what removed, everything. Then we're also going to review the feedback that we got on the tenets from the Planning Commission and Board of Commissioners and review the preliminary draft. We're going to have several meetings to do that. I'll take all that input, go back, finalize those proposed regulations, then bring it back to you guys, make sure everybody's on board with things, make the presentations again to the Planning Commission and Board of Commissioners, get their input, revise, lather, rinse, repeat, until we get something that everybody's sort of on board with. So the timeline. So February and March, we're going to have the initial workshop or task force meetings on the tenets today, and our next meeting will be focused on those. Getting into April, we'll be doing the presentations to the Planning Commission and Board of Commissioners. May through June, we'll start working on the draft language, and towards the end of that process, we're going to come back and have 3 meetings with you guys to go over what we've sort of drafted, and then meet with a special task force to receive the comments and integrate, adjust, et cetera. And hopefully, come November, December, we're going to be presenting to the Planning Commission and Board of Commissioners the final draft, if you will, and again, get their input, revise as needed. We'll certainly be looking for your input throughout this entire process up until the very end. So what are we hoping mixed-use regulations can accomplish? Pulling basically the words from the 2020 update, we're looking to spur revitalization, economic development, and investment, and promote efficient use of the existing infrastructure and resources that we have. We want to make sure that we focus on encouraging high-quality design and do so by promoting flexibility, but providing more control as well. One of the outcomes is that we hope to encourage greater housing opportunity and choice, including for affordable workforce seasonal help residents. And all of these efforts should result in the enhancement of the city's unique character, its scale, and target and focus on the area's redevelopment potential to encourage that investment in the area. So some of the other elements from the CDP include promotion of pedestrian and bicycle travel. And we want to maintain a pedestrian scale, a friendly streetscape that allows people to feel comfortable walking and biking throughout the area. Some of the byproducts of that, reducing roadway congestion, mitigating air pollution. By co-locating multiple uses, you can help to cut down on more trips in the car. We talked about promoting and protecting the sense of community, the place, and enhancing vitality. And then zoning regulations as a whole are typically set up to protect property owners as well as adjacent property owners. So we don't want to have any negative externalities from a parcel's use in a mixed-use case and have that spill over to any people adjacent or in the area. And we want to make sure that we're not creating conditions where adverse impacts can happen. So it's a balance. It's a balance. So our focus with this task force is really going to be looking at the existing zoning code, in particular Chapter 270. Our current code does allow for mixed uses, but the regulations aren't super precise and specific to those mixed uses. And what I mean by that is a mixed use is a permitted use within a commercial district. However, when you have that mixed use being actually proposed, what regulation, what exact code article do we look at for the standards that proposal must adhere to? How much parking is required for what they're proposing? Well, if you've got a commercial space and a residential space, those might be two completely different parking table elements. So we're trying to find a medium point that isn't overly burdensome, but that doesn't create parking issues on the street like we have. So we're trying to use an incremental-based approach. We don't want to overreach in any direction and create regulations that are either overly burdensome or carte blanche. So it's going to be that fine balance beam, if you will, the high wire act of where is that happy medium? And then, finding opportunities to insert incentives into the code to encourage housing opportunity. Just throwing things out there, we might be talking about reduced parking requirements if they provide X type of housing, or whatever the case may be. I don't want to get in too far, but I'll talk through this in a second. And there's a couple maps here, so the behind the dais there is the overall zoning map of the city. And in the far one over there, we've highlighted the commercially zoned parcels within the city. They're in the various shades of red there. And I'll pull those up here in a second. So those commercial districts are what our target is based on the language in the 2020 update to the CDP. I also want to point out here that we do have an existing definition in the zoning code for what mixed use is. And it specifies, as applied to buildings, it means the inclusion within a building of both commercial and residential uses. So this isn't necessarily going to expand to industrial, institutional type uses, but we're really sort of focused on those commercial and residential compositions. So here's sort of a different way of looking at that map there. Just wanted to show you some basic statistics here. So the distribution of the various zoning classes in the city. At the top here are your residentials. R1 is by far the most geographically large area. And at the bottom here are your commercials. So, the C1 is about 43 acres, C3 about 13. And there's only really two parcels that are C2 that are right in this area here. I don't know if you can see my cursor super well on the screen. But point being is there's a pretty good amount of C1 and C3 out there that this task force is going to be focused on. And the primary areas, up and down the main street, along the boardwalk, and then you got these parcels out here, which we can't forget about. We've got to make sure that we're including in our consideration these guys down here as we address the bulk of them, which are going to be along those main thoroughfares. Again, another way to look at the same sort of data, just a different way of thinking about it, the number of parcels. So before we talked about the gross area, so the number of parcels involved in commercial districts. Well, in C1, it would help if you could actually maybe read that, because I can't even. We've got 24 different parcels in C1. As I said, 2 parcels as C2 and 9 as a C3, which is fewer than you would think. But that's what the numbers tell us. All right. So when I say C1, C2, C3, what do those actually mean? Morning, sir. So C1 and C2 are primary opportunity areas for larger scale development. C3, on the other hand, there are existing restrictions in the zoning code that specify that C3 is intended for lesser intensity uses. So those are more of the residential and office combinations that you might see, or residential and smaller commercial buildings. I see, Bob, I think yours, it would probably be a good example of that lower intensity type use where it's not a large scale multi-unit residential with a large scale commercial underneath. So again, we've got the parcels and the acreages here. In total, 280 parcels, 57 acres. And just some quick illustrations from our friend Street View, just to give us a couple of pictures of what we're looking at. So you got 405 Delaware Avenue here on the left, and 56 Baltimore on the right. Those are all C1s. C2, these are primarily boardwalk. So we've got Funland and Coors Brother, Green Turtle, that entire structure there. C3, 38 Wilmington Avenue area. And you see, even where we have a C3, we've still got a larger scale multifamily over top there. But then a more I guess the more likely scenario is the image on the right, which is 55 Lake Avenue there, where you see more of the smaller scale, single-family type residence, which often has a commercial aspect to it as well. So we've talked about what we're trying to do. Let's talk about some of the things that we are not going to be doing. So our focus here is not going to address the existing site plan review process insofar as the overarching workflows. Now, of course, in that site plan review process, the updated zoning regulations will be enforced during the review of these mixed-use proposals. But the process, how a plan navigates and makes its way through the different levels of review, that's something we don't want to really focus on, because that's an existing process. It's been working. There's always opportunity for modification there, but that's not our focus really. Again, we're not trying to change the character of any zoning districts. So as I mentioned before, the C3, they specify that it's a lower intensity commercial use. We don't want to change that to all of a sudden be high intensity, large scale buildings. That would start to really change the character of the city, and that's not what we want to do. We want to make sure that we're encouraging redevelopment and infill that's in harmony with the existing community, that maintains the architectural design standards and aesthetic, and that encourages our needed housing options. And the bottom point there was, as I mentioned, the Tier 3 uses in a C3, excuse me, are limited to 10,000 square feet of commercial use. They don't cap residential in the same fashion, but again, 10,000 square feet just for a commercial indicates that it is not the location for a big retail outlet. You know what I mean? All right, so now we're going to get into some of the specific areas that we want to consider. And by no means is this the entire universe of things that we can consider and talk about, but these are just some of the things that, in collaboration with the planning department and with others, that jumped out at us as opportunities to address some of the big goals. Okay. Big one, parking regulations. So, as I mentioned before, there's a little hole in that we don't have a mixed-use parking required ratio. We address commercial, we address residential, but we don't say what a mixed-use ratio for parking is, whether it's in terms of number of square feet or number of dwelling units or residential units. So we need to try and define what that should be. And then, is there an opportunity to make it simple so that it's easy to understand, easy to comply with, and reasonable? And then where do we put the parking? A lot of times in these sites, we've seen different proposals for underground parking. There's also some with above ground on second, third, fourth floors. Is there opportunity to allow for shared parking? You know, where we have a multitude of commercial uses or residential uses side by side, is there anything to be gained by allowing them to consolidate their need into one site and split it? It's an option, it's a question. And then similarly, can we give them greater distance for their parking areas that would allow them to place them a little further away than is currently allowed? 700 feet, 800 feet? 700. Yep, 700, thank you. So right now the regulations permit a distance of 700 feet from the parcel to the parking area. Is that sufficient? Is that too much? You know, how do we measure 700 feet? Yeah, that's certainly a question that's come up. Is it as the crow flies, or is it through existing pedestrian passageways? You know, I don't think we can reasonably expect people to jump over or under a building. So, you know, should that be refined a bit to be more clear? What if we look at the size of the parking spaces and provide some incentives to have a distribution of space sizes so that we have compact, extra large, et cetera, while also maintaining our ADA parking requirement standards? And then a big topic now and moving into the future is going to be electric vehicle charging stations. Is that something that we should provide incentive for? That's a question. And then also looking at the vehicular circulation paths within parking. I believe it's 24 foot wide currently if you have 90-degree parking. Is that right? Yeah, and then it's slightly less if you have 75-degree parking. 20 foot? I can't remember offhand. It's slightly less than 24.
22.
22, thank you. So there's ways that we can modify those standards without impacting the use of the space. Is that something we want to consider more? And fundamentally, a lot of these regulations, we don't necessarily want to come across as telling owners and developers what and how to do. We want to give them flexibility to address their economic needs, their perceived or understood market demands, and what the residents or future inhabitants want in these spaces. You know, we want to be flexible, but ensure that we're protecting the character of the city is fundamentally what it comes down to. Another large area to look at is lot coverage. Well, for the most part, in the commercial districts, as long as you have commercial on the first floor, you are permitted to have 100% lot coverage. Now, there are typically not a lot of setbacks required in these areas. For the most part, if I recall correctly, it's 0-foot lot lines on all sides. I don't think we want to get into try and changing that simply because it's not going to be effective. If the existing building footprint is lot line to lot line, they're going to be able to replace that structure essentially. So not a lot of opportunity there, but if they come in with something different, is there other regulations, other setbacks that we should be considering? Just throwing it out there as a question. Building height. The commercial zones do have limitations on the height and number of floors. And there are provisions to exceed that basic height limit for things like your mechanicals, your HVAC, solar, et cetera, your elevator, mechanic room. So absolute maximum is about 50 foot, but target is 42 before you add the mechanicals in, if I'm getting my numbers right. All right. So is there another way to approach this? Instead of, and I'm making things up here, but instead of saying you are limited to 4 floors, why don't we say, well, you're limited to 42 feet. You can do however many number of floors within the minimum and maximum of the building code, but you have a little bit more flexibility to play around with it. So where that comes into play is under the floor area ratio regulations. And so in ballpark general terms, the higher the ratio, the greater the density of use that you can have on that lot. And the definition of FAR within a code comes from 274 in the code, and it's essentially the total covered area of all floors divided by the total lot area. Quick note, though, is that some of the interior areas are not subject to be counted within that cumulative area. There are some exceptions, but those are details we don't necessarily have to dive into unless you want to. One of the points here that I was making in regard to the heights, though, is if you have a floor and a ceiling height that is 12 foot or greater, that FAR, that area is doubled when you are calculating the FAR. So does that create a disincentive for flexibility? Something we should consider. And also, as the code currently exists, it doesn't specify how multifamily units are to calculate FAR. So do we need to address that? Should we? Something we'll be talking about. Another big thing is the architectural design guide, and this is perhaps one of the most important elements, I believe. You know, based on our overarching goals of maintaining the aesthetic and pedestrian feel of the city, the architectural guidelines that have been developed in 99, 9? I can't recall the specific year. I'm sorry. But when they were developed, they've been actually very helpful in making sure that we have some regulations, some principles in place that help builders, architects, engineers, et cetera, shape their proposal. And as a general comment, I think it's been somewhat successful in helping to minimize, mitigate, reduce the number of sites that are not so consistent with the existing aesthetic fields. So how do we want to integrate references to that design guide? How strict do we want to be in suggesting their use? I don't think we want to go so far as putting it as a requirement, but a real strong suggestion, perhaps. We'll get into that as we go through this. Residential unit sizes is another topic that we can be discussing. So the current minimum for a multifamily residential unit is 300 square foot on average. Are there modifications to that number that we should consider as well to bring it down? If we look at a lot of trends in the future of housing, you see some push towards what we would historically refer to as single room occupancies. These would be like the old buildings in New York City, for example, where you had a single man who would be renting a bed, a minimal kitchen area, and a shared bathroom, perhaps. Is that something that we want to consider? Is that something that could be helpful for the city in providing sufficient stock in their housing options? Or is this fine as it is? Are we good with that? Another topic that we're going to address is loading docks. When are they required? How many? At what scale? Where are they located? How are they accessed? All of these pieces, especially with a commercial development component, have an impact on the design of the site. They influence traffic congestion directly. They impact neighbors based on what time of day they come, how noisy they are. Similarly with trash pickup. So while it might seem like a minor thing, it has a real impact on what we end up having built here. Briefly mentioned setbacks. There's, as I said before, limited opportunities based on the existing setbacks. But we also want to look at the vertical step back. So right now, for new development, we are looking at a 14-foot, at 14 foot in elevation, you need to start going back so that you don't have an imposing streetscape that creates a vertical wall of structures that has an effect of reducing the friendliness of the pedestrian feel. It discourages people from getting out and walking and biking and engaging in their community. So we want to see that we can maintain, enhance that, and include it where it's feasible. I briefly touched on trash as well. So looking at storage and screening of refuse. The regulations, as I read, require it to be on-site. Well, again, as with parking, is there an opportunity, perhaps, to allow for consolidation of trash receptacles, or so that, again, if you have multiple commercial uses, a couple different restaurants, what have you, can they locate their dumpsters in a specific area, of course, with agreements and all the legal documents needed to maintain those, and thereby reduce the burden on each individual site and reduce the impacts to the whole surrounding area? Something to think about. All right. So I just threw a bunch of different things out at you. Now I want to hear what you guys think as big picture stuff, or even getting into some more of the minute elements. Just want to try and get a sense of the temperature. What do we think about the whole concept? Is what I've said so far going down the right road? Have you heard anything that strikes you as, what the heck are you thinking? Any areas that I skipped over? Are there things that we should consider here that perhaps have not. And again, I want to focus this on the main tenets. So here, when I say the tenets, again, we're talking big picture things like the goals. So we've talked about maintaining the aesthetic character, the building composition, the architectural designs, addressing housing option, variability, consumer choice, and providing flexibility to owners, developers to comply with these updated regulations. But then, I don't want to limit us to just those things. So I'm going to give you guys the floor, and we'll figure it out. We'll see how the conversation goes, and we'll adjust as we talk. First of all, any questions on anything I've said? Mr. Perry.
Hi, Nick. One of the questions I have is, I think one of the challenges we will face is how to incentivize the property owners to utilize the benefits of mixed use. And you've been working for the city for quite a bit of time now, and I'm just wondering if you have given any thought to ways in which Rehoboth Beach could incentivize these projects, and what do you see other communities do in terms of incentives?
So I think to begin with, the fundamental incentive for development with these type of mixed uses is an economic one. I think that this market, and these are general comments here, but there's tremendous opportunity. A lot of the commercial district is not built to include the maximum use that it could on a site-by-site basis. And when I say that, what I sort of mean is, in like a C1 area, you might have a 1 or 2 story structure. Well, there's 2 additional stories over top that they could foreseeably go. And that additional room will add the opportunity for more return on their investment. So I think that the fundamental piece to incentivize developers is the opportunity, if you will, the economics, and the market itself will continue to drive the redevelopment and expansion of existing parcel uses. I know that doesn't fully address your question. So what can the city do to further incentivize through the zoning regulations? Is that sort of also your question as well?
That's part of my question.
Okay. So I think by providing more clarity on what a mixed-use project needs to address in terms of how you calculate FAR, what the parking requirements are, what type of loading requirements. Having clarity in your code allows developers and owners to be able to develop conceptual ideas at a more appropriate or realistic scale. And so by having an understanding of what they're going to be able to build there, they can look to see if what they are trying to do is economically feasible. So providing clarity in those standards as well as process is another incentive, I think. Now, I know those are fairly small, it may seem, but they're significant from a developer's perspective, I think. Having that understanding of what your expectations are and what you can do is going to give them the freedom to explore everything under that. I'm probably still not addressing your question, I have a feeling.
I think there are, in my opinion, there are several facets to this. We have some parcels, for example, the 413 through 417 Rehoboth Avenue, which for all intents and purposes were residential properties, pretty much. Those seem to me to be easier to understand how you can develop a mixed-use project. On the other hand, I think we have to recognize that we have an aging structure base in downtown Rehoboth. So part of the incentive, it seems to me, has to be not only what kind of incentives do you provide for people to build on those smaller parcels, but how do you incentivize existing property owners to perhaps do something with their existing buildings to upgrade them and utilize the benefits of mixed use? Ordinarily, those things are done through tax incentives. I don't want to go there, but that's why I'm struggling with how does a community like Rehoboth Beach incentivize even existing property owners to upgrade their properties? I think we've got a situation in a lot of cases that it's a disaster waiting to happen. I think the infrastructure of a lot of these buildings, in terms of wiring and
Structural and all of it.
structural,
Yeah.
I mean, if you
Aesthetically,
went down in the
too.
basements of some of the older structures, you'd
Might
be
get a little
worried. So, how do we, figure out a way to incentivize those property owners to be able to upgrade
Yep.
their structures?
And so part of my hesitancy in giving that response about tax-based incentives is that it's a little bit outside of our purview here. We're truly focused on the zoning regs, but I think your point is absolutely valid in that there are structures out there that are compromised and need rehabilitation at a minimum, if not full tear down and replacement. And that's not a cheap process. But my general belief is that the market will drive a lot of the incentive for expansion of those uses on a parcel by parcel basis. Because I don't think it's going to be as economically as great an economic opportunity to replace a two-story building in kind when you have the opportunity to add 4 with additional sources of revenue. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, I understand that aspect.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Nick, if I could, and then I think we do need to do a little bit more research on this. We're also talking about, in addition to tax incentives, and I know that's always like, that's like a third rail. I think there's a couple of other things I've looked at in other communities, and this might be another hot button issue. Density bonuses, what in this case would be FAR bonuses, perhaps a reduction if you do a certain type of housing, if we want to incentivize a certain type of housing unit, would be perhaps a reduction in parking requirements. We did that up in Newark with some effect. So here again, this is not Newark, just to say, but certainly we could also research some other incentives that might be more appropriate for Rehoboth. But I think that's a really good point to further explore.
Absolutely. I agree that taxes should be a consideration at some level, and that would be for the Board of Commissioners and the other representatives to consider, but it shouldn't be removed from consideration, just not by us. Let me ask a general question. Do you all think that incentivizing a mixture of residential variety is a good thing for the commercial districts? Just as a very big general question. Mark?
Can I just
Please.
say to that, I think it's important that we look at the lack of lower income and working place housing that we don't have. But I don't believe for a minute that we need any more Airbnbs. And I hope that we'll be able to discuss how we can produce one without the other.
It's a very good point. That's a very good point. Perhaps it's in the structure of the ownership of the building itself. For example, a condominium unit, they could have individual restrictions within their covenants to prohibit the rental on short-term basis. Whether or not we could do that through zoning regulation, I'd have to look a little closely and report back to you on that. But I absolutely agree with the premise that we want to not preclude all rental, but limit the negative short-term impacts that some of these Airbnb type.
Minimum rental times, yeah.
Yeah. How do we do that without constraining other rentals that are perhaps more tolerable, if that makes sense? Again, a fine line, but we'll take a look into that, and we'll see what we can come to agreement on and what's appropriate. But I hear you that you're saying that you agree in general that we need to address affordable workforce type housing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just as a quick show of hands, anybody in opposition to that concept? Hey, we got 1 point of agreement. I'll take it. Fantastic. Okay, so all right, my job's done. I've got agreement on something. I'm going to go. No, I'm kidding. So the commercial spaces, do you have any questions on how they interact with the residential areas here, or any general thoughts on conceptually, are there any limitations that we should be thinking about or restrictions based on what you've seen so far? Is there something that's been frustrating you guys out of things as they currently stand? Is it an appropriate topic that we should consider here? Any thoughts on that?
I have something on the,
Please.
so the commercial, when you get into the fire code, and I know we're not discussing fire code right now, but there's a multitude of occupancy classifications, everything from assembly to educational, daycare, healthcare, commercial, residential. It goes through, there's like 12 or 13 or 14 different classifications. So I'm looking here where it says in 270 TAC 4, within a building of commercial and residential use. Now, do we consider commercial here the typical, what everybody thinks, it's a store, something like that, but there are other forms of occupancy? Are we considering changing to allow daycare and residential on top, or a healthcare building on the bottom and a residential on top? I'm just throwing that out there, as there are other things when you get into the actual classifications, something to think about.
And I'm sorry, in 274, which definition were you looking at?
The definition that you have highlighted.
Oh, for mixed use, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
My
for
apologies.
mixed use, right?
I
So I guess I don't know, I haven't dug into it enough to understand whether there's a multitude of commercial in our code. Does it list a bunch of them?
and that's,
Okay.
yes.
And I was just looking at that.
Where
There
is
are a
the-
number of uses, permitted uses for each zone.
Okay.
That's, okay, so under tier one, and this is for a C1 district, I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh, yes, sorry. You can't read that super tiny? Okay, so C1, it designed to include commercial areas wherein uses are not restricted to floor space.
Look at tier 3, that's really the commercial uses.
There, thank
Yeah.
you. All right, so it does include tier 1 and tier 2 uses, by right, anything under R2, mid-rise apartment, tourist rooms, et cetera. So there's your residential allowance within a commercial. Also hotel, motel, inn are permitted. Tier 3 is where we get into the details of the commercial elements. Fire stations, public-private parking lots, all retail stores, well, not all, no birds, no animals, so no vets, essentially. Well, no, actually, you could have a vet, just not a sale. Actually, I have to read that. Anyway, restaurants, theaters, pool tables, bowling, et cetera. Food. I don't know that we'll see a telephone central office ever come up again, but hey, you could. You could have an electric and gas utility building. Now, that's different than a utility, but this is more focused on the actual like office building component where you'd go to pay your bills, et cetera. Labs, printing, engraving, laundry, dry cleaning, offices and studios, office buildings, banks, and courts of law, private club or lodge, can't say that, self-service laundry, tennis courts, gyms, health club, parking garages, repair shops, and undertakers. So it's a wide variety of commercial uses there. In going through that sort of list there, was there anything, David, that particularly caught your eye, or anybody else, anything that you don't feel should be included in a mixed-use proposal? And I should also note that a special exception is allowed by the BOA for inclusion of a public or private school or churches in this area and tier.
Nick, if I may, just sort of some perspective here. This code and these tier uses were developed and written in the 70s. So a lot of this that you see listed there is a result of the fact that those were the businesses that were existing in the town at that time. You don't see necessarily here a bank, the post office, physician offices. As we have evolved, the code has not evolved. And I think those are things that trying to review this in a holistic manner maybe is an aspect that we're very famous for band-aiding things here in the city. So I think that these also need to be looked at for looking into the future, such as daycare, adult daycare, all of that aspect. So I don't want to pigeonhole it, but that's something.
Agreed. And that's something, I'm sorry, not
No,
to cut you off.
and paralleling that, why are we here? One of the points that you mentioned is encourage and permit infill and redevelopment of the commercial districts with a variety of mixed uses without changing the character of the city. And what I glean from that is basically flexibility, but without impacting the character of the city. My question goes back to, where do we define the character of the city? I think it's that old saying, I guess, from the Supreme Court, it's can't define pornography, but when I see it, I know what it is. So again, that character, sometimes some of it is outlined within the CDP. So I don't know if take a step back so that we all could come review that point of what the character of the city is, so that we know where we're moving towards or what we're trying to be flexible about, I guess.
And I think also the architectural design guideline manual has a lot of discussion of the different elements that make up the feel, the aesthetics.
It's primarily designed to focus on residential, but you can take those elements and translate them into commercial aspects also.
Exactly. So there might well be other suggestions that we want to append to the design guideline, and perhaps that is something that we can also address in this process. Mary Ellen, is that reasonable? Okay. So again, I don't want to constrain us to only looking at things that we've mentioned here or that are explicitly within the zoning code somewhere. We do need to provide that flexibility, as you said, in not only the uses, but in the design elements. But your point about making sure that we all are sort of on the same page when we're talking about the street feel and the aesthetic and the existing standards, let's talk about that for a minute. My impression, and keep in mind, I'm not a resident here. I've had a few years, obviously, of working with the city, during which I've gained a lot of appreciation and perspective for the history of the development in this area. My impression is that the street feel is made by a healthy integration of the commercial areas on the ground floor at grade, inviting pedestrians to browse, so an open feeling, with a sort of cohesion between the sidewalk and the front of the building. So essentially zero lot line is what I'm saying there. But the nice thing from my perspective is that as you're walking down the streets, you don't have vertical 5-story structures that cast shadows and give you this sense of being confined within a tunnel, if you will. And that's due to the vertical step back type of requirements. So by having that 14-foot and 30-degree step back, it provides greater room to breathe, if you will. It encourages light and air circulation, and allows you to feel not confined, as I said. So that's a lot of my perspective, but what do you guys think? What do you think makes up the character of development here?
Just as a point of reference also, looking back to where we came from, if you look at the zoning map, and maybe many of you already realize this, but the streets in the original plot of the city of Rehoboth, they are wider at the beach sides, and then they narrow back so that those residential or commercial or whomever have a sight line of the beach and open up. So, I mean, the original design of the streets were such that, keep your eye on the prize, which is the beach, of why a lot of people are attracted to the city of Rehoboth and that open kind of small town, if you will, feel, however you design that. But I think what you're talking about is those mass and bulk items that have happened, a large revolt, if you will, in the 70s of the high rises, the old phrase, the bumper stickers, we don't want to be Ocean City. So how do you either prevent that or prevent that by design standards and guidelines that bring you in the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years? I mean, that's really what we're looking at here, I think.
I would agree. And that gets back to how do we integrate the existing design standards? Are the existing design standards sufficient? And to what degree are they required, suggested, et cetera? That's a question that we need to take a stab at. Personally, I don't think you want to be requiring, but so much as incentivizing, promoting, and pretty much giving them a darn good reason to go that direction as opposed to somewhere else. So then we can get in talking about, well, should we offer density bonuses for compliance with or adherence to the design code? Susan?
Nick, I have a question, then a basic comment about the code in one area that I think is particularly problematic. The question is, have there been ideas, proposals submitted to the city for uses that we can't do because the code doesn't really allow it? I mean, have there been some ideas that have come forward on mixed use? Because I'd be curious what people want to do that they haven't been able to do. That's the first question. And you may not have an answer today, but I am curious about that.
Unfortunately, I don't have enough history
Yeah.
to say a concrete answer. And Mary Ellen, are you familiar with any offhand?
Not since I've been here, but certainly I could seek some additional institutional knowledge.
Yeah, just curious.
We'll definitely ask that question of the other officials and staff.
So the code element is this. You had mentioned the residential unit sizes being 300 square feet average, which is in the code. The other thing that's in the code is, for instance, when the Planning Commission approved 413, 417 Rehoboth Avenue that are mixed use, commercial on the first floor, apartment above. Only one apartment above, because the code requires 5,000 square feet of land for every dwelling unit. So, so the condominiums essentially can't be built in the city right now under that code. Now, I'll say two things about that. First of all, it was put there purposely by a referendum vote 20 years ago. So I don't know that we want to just blow it up. I mean, it was put there intentionally. On the other hand, if you're looking at changes for mixed use, that would seem to be one, because you could only do one residential unit in a mixed-use structure the way the code currently reads.
And you're absolutely right, and I think that gets sort of close to the restrictions in the Tier 3 area with commercial use as well. It's a similar concept in that we don't want to go to the extreme, but we want to provide this opportunity. So again, where is that balance?
Well, the Tier 3 uses, I think, don't have restrictions. Those are, as you said, lot line to lot line.
Well, within District 3, I might have said tier instead, in the
C3.
C3, yeah. In C3, there's the 10,000 square foot limitation.
Oh, but see, I'm not sure that's an issue, because the C3s also back up to residential, do they not? So I think that again, there's a reason for that.
And I simply offered it as an example.
I mean, there's a big difference between having to have 5,000 for any dwelling unit and having an overall 10,000. I'm sort of okay with the overall 10,000 of C3 right now, anyway.
Yeah, and really my point was just to show a comparison, supporting that concept of not wanting to change the scale and intensity
exactly.
in a lot of these areas.
Yeah,
Because that would definitely have a negative impact on
Right.
those residentials that
Right.
back up to those areas.
Yeah.
So again, we're sort of constrained by the desire for the flexibility, for the encouragement, for the incentivization, without the negative impact. So it's a balance, as I've said many times here. Bob, you had your hand up a second ago.
Yeah, along the same line, with respect to having one residential unit over the commercial, that's where I am at 48 Wilmington. Out of ignorance, when I purchased the lot, and I was planning on having 2 units.
Speak into your mic, please, sir. Sorry.
I'm sorry. When I purchased the lot, I was anticipating 2 units.
Yeah.
I had a home on Delaware, and I was planning on staying there. But when I learned from a great architect that I can only have the 1 unit, I made it my home because it is a mansion. Okay, I've got almost 4,000 square feet of luxury living above that. But the cost,
I don't know how you have that,
for-
but anyway.
but you know, the cost economically, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
It's great for me, but if you're looking to develop a property, the economics will not work.
Right.
The economics are totally dependent on what you can do above the commercial. There will not be, I don't think, any more development in either commercial or mixed use of single-story commercial units without something above. The economics don't work on new construction with the current price of land.
Quick question
So-
for you, Bob. What's the ballpark square footage of the commercial area on the first floor?
1,900 square feet,
Okay.
plus or minus.
Just,
And including, you know, my elevator and entrance is on the ground floor, so
Mm-hmm.
including that, I'm up close to 4,000 square feet
gotcha.
on the with the second and third floor.
Okay.
Because they didn't, because they didn't stick to the 50% lot coverage for the residential portion.
Well, we had the 5-foot setbacks.
Right.
Okay. And I would do it a little differently if I was going to do it again. Plus, it makes a difference if you're doing development on one lot versus
Right.
2 or 3 adjacent lots.
Right.
What you can do physically
Yep.
differs a whole lot.
I
Absolutely.
mean, we just had a proposal, this wasn't in the commercial district, but we just had a concept review come to the planning commission last month for the Canal Side Inn property, where they wanted to put townhouses, and they
Right.
can't, because it's one lot. Now, the lot may be dividable, I don't know, but that's obviously in the residential, but the density vertically is what you were talking about earlier, density bonuses vertically, and, you know, I would certainly support that kind of change for the, you know,
And,
commercial area.
But Susan, I think your point about the threshold sizes
Yeah.
is something that we need to address as well.
Definitely.
Because are those reasonable for permitting what we want to see? Is there a way we can modify those, again, to strike that balance?
Agree.
So, you know, I think that's a very critical point that we will be discussing. Any other thoughts out there? And yeah, I'm sorry, I can't see your name that far. I can't remember.
Jenny.
Jenny, thank you. I'm sorry.
Just listening and just what comes to mind for me, being on Baltimore Avenue every day, I think about Dinah Lingo's property on the corner of First Street and Baltimore Avenue. She has 4 retail shops below and has 10 apartments above. And then a separate building with a store and then 3 apartments above. And I think about the square footage. So my store, Lydia's, next to Blue Moon, if anybody's been in there, that's 435 square feet. So you think about an apartment that size. I know some of Dinah's apartments are smaller than that above there, and a lot of people that work and live or work in downtown Rehoboth live there because it's affordable. But what I think about is later in the future when the property comes up for sale and someone wants to really purchase it and make use of that space, I feel like the city's code is going to limit somebody from doing and that's why we're here, doing a multi-use, tear the whole building down, because obviously it's very old. Our building was built in 1906 by the Downs family. So my dad and his partners developed the bottom floor of that house, which is 33 Baltimore Avenue. The upstairs was a rooming house when they bought it. So there's multi-rooms up there. My tenants have space, no air or heat are up there, but it's just an extra storage space. But they're all little rooms upstairs. 200, 100 square feet, 250 square feet. All the doors have the numbers on them. And I think about a developer coming in and thinking about doing or really developing a property like Donna's or ours in the future. It's kind of, they're backed into a corner in a lot of ways. Yep. Because if they're made to do a multi-use or if they want to develop it. So it's just an interesting thought to think about, like, the reality of how we're sitting here. And you think about someone who spends a lot of money on that piece of land because they're going to tear the building down, and how a multi-use is going to work. And in my opinion, the J1 students and young people who work downtown at Funland, and they're not going to be able to afford to live in those areas at all.
Right, exactly.
Because of the cost of water and everything that goes into living downtown, and the parking and the trash and everything. They just don't. Most of the restaurateurs that I know, they've purchased homes way out, and they turn these homes, like on Postal Lane. A couple of restaurateurs have bought some land on Munchie Branch Road, and that's where they put their managers and their workers in those areas, and they scooter in.
And that's a burden for a business owner to have to consider, where are my staff going to be able to live? And it points to the absolute need to really create more of those units in the city that are closer and that they could conceivably bike, walk to work with. And that, gets back to the minimum average unit size element. If we could take it from a 300 to a 250 to a whatever number we feel is appropriate, would that provide the potential income for an owner to then balance the economic equation between their costs and their incomes from it?
Cost effectiveness of it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I want to be clear that as well, the mixed-use element in the regulations wouldn't require any developer or owner to pursue a mixed use. They could still do a straight residential, straight commercial activity on those sites. This is just giving them the conditions and the opportunities to meet that, the option, exactly. But unfortunately, there's only so much we can indirectly do with a zoning code to manipulate the economics. Demand and supply. Supply we can sort of kind of address. The demand and the amount of money that individuals are willing to spend for X type of units is something less directly within our control, within this limited purview. That said, in theory, having greater number of units should lower the price, should be able to supply the demand that's existing right now. There's unmet demand, and so that is also having an impact on costs. Mark, I think you had your hand up?
You covered most of what I was going to say, so.
Okay.
Maybe somebody else.
Somebody else did have a hand up at one point, I thought. Maybe, maybe not. Okay. But I think overall, the point, Jenny, that I would absolutely agree with is that we need to provide flexibility, again, for the individual unit size. And I think by permitting a lower average, as well as allowing things like a shared bathroom, perhaps, for X number of units, or a shared kitchen. I'm throwing things out there that haven't been really utilized in a tremendous number of years. It's more akin to like a dorm setup, if you will. Is that something that would be an option? I don't know. You guys tell me. It's conceivable. It's possible.
For employee housing, I would hope so. Also, no parking requirements for employee housing.
Exactly. Yes. Speaking to the mic, Bob, I'm
Speaking
sorry.
to the mic.
Sorry.
It's a recurring issue, don't worry. You're not the only
No
one.
parking requirements for employee housing. Currently, one of the pictures there, I own Brighton Suites, but the house next door I use for employee housing, and the second house in back is my maintenance person. But I'm not, I could not create that again in today's market. Therefore, that house will stay. It may be redeveloped 20 years from now, but not in the foreseeable future.
Not with current conditions.
That house is essential for the J1 students.
Yeah. What's that property zoned, do you know offhand?
It's C3.
It's a C3, okay, okay.
You have that property and then the 3 parking lots owned by the Simplers.
Okay.
And then one more house.
Yep.
And then 48 Wilmington.
Well, and what you just said there brings up another whole topic. There are 3 parcels adjacent to each other that are all surface lots.
Yes.
Okay.
And that will change at some point, I assume.
Right. And there we get back to the concept of shared parking as a question. Is that something that we could theoretically address and consider and provide some structure for that would alleviate?
I've actually seen that done in a number of areas.
Yeah.
And I think it can work well. If it's a daytime business and then, the nighttime is residential, yeah, I think that's a great concept.
And I mean, that's a surface level lot. I mean, in one opinion, you could say, well, why not have multiple stories of parking? I mean, that brings up other questions and issues, of course, but conceptually, it would add additional parking, relieving the burden of on-street parking. Could be a source of revenue for the property owner if it's open to the public, or it could provide additional opportunity for shared parking. Point being is that parcels like that provide opportunity for a developer if they have the permission and the flexibility to do and supply what the market's demanding based on what the zoning code allows, if that makes sense.
I'd like to make a comment again. Thinking about Berlin, the city of Berlin brought in an urban developer. I don't know if anybody's familiar with what happened there, but they had a lot of the old houses there that were commercial and they were run down. And take the home that's behind the Moore building on the 2nd Street, which is the little gift shop there. What's it called? In between the Amora and Soulfire, right on 2nd Street.
This is Berlin, Maryland, correct?
No, here,
Oh,
no,
I'm
in
sorry, see,
Rehoboth.
I'm in the
So
wrong-
they took a house like that and they gave incentive for someone to buy that and turn it into a multi-use. So a lot of those old houses that look very similar to, I can't remember the store's name, that's on 2nd Street next to Amora. Winding Beam. So there's the person that owns the store lives upstairs, but the city gave them incentive to do that and renovate a space that would be, brought it up to fire code, but also gave them a little bit more leniency so the space would be usable and it's an open business. So if you walk around there, there's many, many stores like that where they've turned these old houses, and there's 3 on Baltimore Avenue like that, that are residents that could turn into a commercial space. But I think that a developer or someone who's thinking about purchasing a house like that might be intimidated by the city to even do that because of the code.
And that's, I agree conceptually and made the point earlier that giving greater clarity to developers and builders at the onset, knowing what the limitations and restrictions are and what they can and can't do, is not insignificant. When you say that the Berlin gave the owners an incentive, was that an economic or was that regulatory?
The person I was discussing this with was Justine, who used to own Planet X on Wilmington Avenue, and she, because of the Simplers were developing that property, she lost her space and moved to Berlin and has her restaurant there. And I was discussing it with her about how they really kind of open their arms to people like her to come and build or have a restaurant in an old space and live upstairs.
Yep.
So I don't know clearly what the incentive was, if they did give them a tax break or if they were a little bit more lenient about how it was developed. Maybe not nickel and diming, for them to like take a space that is basically vacant and turn it into a space where someone could have a small business and open something and then live upstairs.
Absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't see who had their hand up first. But Jay, please go ahead. We'll get back to you in a second, Mr. Perry.
What Jenny's been doing is describing form code, and that solves so many problems. If we just collect the low-hanging fruit in the commercial district, form code just answers all of our goals, our objectives, Rick's incentive, Bob's incentives. You keep the form of the building like Jenny's describing, but on the inside, you're allowed to do what you need to do to make it commercially acceptable.
Yeah.
And you keep the same look of the city. We could keep the same setbacks. We could keep the same view shed. I know, Frank, we argued about whether to build the life-saving station to fill that whole end of Baltimore because we lost our view shed. And Rehoboth, with its streets, its wide streets, already has a good start.
Yep.
This is just something I would love to see us just talk about it. And there are other cities in the United States who've done that.
Absolutely. So form-based code, I'm not sure if everybody's familiar, it essentially differs from a traditional approach to zoning regulations in that it is more concerned with the final product than the incremental combination of regulations, setback, height, FAR, et cetera. And really focuses on making sure the end product is in harmony with the surrounding areas. My opinion on form-based codes is multiple. From my perspective, both as a planner having enforced zoning regulations, done all of the typical planner things, reviewing and commenting, all that stuff, as well as trying to write and develop code as well. Form-based code is darn tricky to get right from a creation standpoint.
You have to have help.
Oh, well, I'm sorry?
You have to have help.
Oh, you've got to have not only help, but time. And it is a time-consuming process to get it right. It's also not something that you can piecemeal, in that you can't append on easily a form-based code section for X, Y, and Z purposes without then revising the whole of the code. Not the whole of the code, but a significant portion to integrate appropriately. And so my experience with those areas that have a form-based code is spotty. It's mixed in terms of what the staff think of it, what the developers and owners think of it, and how they have experienced the process of working a proposal through it. I mean, the devil's in the details with those specifically. And it's mixed based on how well those form-based codes are created, how the market interests push the type of proposals for that area, and the willingness of the regulated, of the property owners, to comply with the intent. Not so much the letter, but the intent. Anytime you have a differing intent, people are going to find a way to exploit loopholes or gaps. And it's difficult to get a form-based code that covers all of those gaps. So I don't disagree that conceptually form-based code can do a lot of what you're saying, but my counterpoint as well is that perhaps a more streamlined approach that fits within our purview here is looking at the existing design guidelines, perhaps enhancing those, and finding the appropriate way to integrate them into the code without trying to tackle something of that scale as a form-based code. Does that make sense at all to you?
Yeah, it does if you define it the way you're defining it. But it's much more than that.
Please.
We are an upscale community. We're going to have difficulties making the numbers come out for low rent occupancy. That is so challenging, and that's what we want. We want to be able to house our workforce here, just like Jenny was talking. It's going to be difficult to make that come out economically unless we allow the developers, the people who are constructing these dwellings, a little bit of leniency or a lot of leniency.
Yep.
And when we are a town that can afford to do a lot of things, and we have an educated population who will understand these difficult to grasp concepts, I think it's something we should talk about. And I have looked at a number of cities that have gone to a portion of their town form-based code, and I'm thinking our commercial district might be thought about that. And that's all I have.
I don't disagree with much of what you said, honestly. I think there are absolutely time and places and opportunities for form-based codes to be implemented. I just think that our purview here constrains our focus on some of that. I don't want to say that it eliminates focus on that by any means, but it tries to push us towards working within an incremental approach to sort of, I don't want to relegate us to simply tweaking the edges, but to using a incremental approach to transforming and transitioning. I think that a lot of what a form-based code could do can also be addressed by the incentivization of, or the inclusion of incentives for things like FAR bonuses, density bonuses, et cetera, as well as parking reductions, the whole kit and caboodle. So there are multiple ways to get there. And I think, as you said, the low-hanging fruit here is perhaps seeing where we can fit within the existing code and integrate reasonable approaches. That's my perspective. You guys don't have to agree or anything by any means, but I just want to provide you some other perspective on it. There were a couple other hands here that I saw come up. Mr. Perry, or let's go here, and then...
I can pass.
Okay. Go ahead, sir. I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Mike.
Mike, thank you.
Mike Fisher. I see we're here because it's a mandated 5-year review, but it sounds like developers have come to us and we've turned them down because of the code. Do we keep track of what they wanted? In other words, do we have a list of 10 developers over the last couple of years, and what would appease them?
So I don't, and I can't speak to a history beyond what I've personally seen, which only goes back 2.5 years, I believe now, all the proposals that I have seen that have a mixed-use component have not been stopped by any means. They've been modified. They've been tweaked here around the edges in that, adjusting the number of units, housing units, the area of commercial, the number of required parking spaces, things along those lines, but have not been precluded. Susan, you've got a much greater history. Can you?
We don't see what gets turned down.
Well, yeah, good point. I'm sorry. That, unfortunately, so our building inspector, Matt Janis.
Yeah, that's what I asked earlier, if there were any
Yeah.
developers that had come with ideas where they just couldn't do it.
And unfortunately, I
yeah.
simply don't have that
Yeah.
perspective. Real quick, Matt Janis, the building inspector, is going to be here in future meetings.
Oh, okay.
He had a conflict today that was unavoidable. So I'm sorry, Mr. Perry?
Yeah, to Susan's point, she's right. I mean, the planning commission doesn't see what doesn't get to them. And sitting here thinking about this, there's one property on Baltimore Avenue, and Jenny, maybe you know a little bit more about this, but, and it's the property right to the west of Camp Rehoboth. And those guys wanted to do something with that
The
property.
old inn? Is that the
Yeah.
old inn? The old Red Rose Inn?
Yeah, the
Okay.
Rose Inn.
Yeah.
And they wanted to do, I believe, a mixed-use concept there, but they couldn't get past the hurdles of parking requirements and things of that nature, so they ended up just abandoning their plans.
About how long ago was that, do you recall?
Oh, well, the pandemic has sort
I
of
think
messed up my
4
timelines.
4 or 5
years,
years.
yeah.
Oh, and trust me, I hear about that. The pandemic just completely blew away my sense of calendar. So when Matt gets back, we'll inquire about that and see if he can pull up any of the old concepts or any notes he might have.
That would be useful to see what is it
And for a
people want.
market-driven approach.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that we tried to include on this task force here were perspectives from that community, because we need their input. I mean, so much of what we've discussed today has been market.
Right. Well, we heard what
economics.
Bob wanted to do and what he was able to do.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a perspective that we need to integrate into anything that we do. And we need to use caution in the absence of solid evidence to support that. But I think, again, coming back to the goal of flexibility and clarity are two things that we can generally agree are helpful in this situation. Is that fair to say? Please.
So what do we, I'm looking at the timeline and everything. What's your goal today? What do you want to accomplish by today's meeting?
My primary goal personally was to get a sense of where everybody is, because I frankly I'm not familiar with this group, to be frank. I need to understand how much disparity do we have amongst this team here in agreeing on those fundamental goals of increased housing option. To what degree do we want to provide flexibility in various areas? What are the general opinions on how aggressive we should be in these goals and specifically down the road in the approach that we use to get there? Mary Ellen, did you want to add something? I'm sorry, I thought I saw your flag. Okay. So really, by understanding and getting a sense of where you guys are at from your perspectives, it'll help me to come back next time with the goals more clear and streamlined, whatever word you want to use, provide you clarity on those tenets, and then make sure that we are all behind those concepts so that we can come back to the Planning Commission, to the Board of Commissioners, and make sure that they also are on board with those big picture ideas and concepts. Does that answer your question at all? In terms of what we were trying to accomplish? This is our getting our feet wet, if you will. Getting familiar with one another, getting a conversation going, setting the stage. Really, a lot of the details are going to be in the subsequent meeting where we have more targeted points to consider. But I don't want to go into the next meeting not understanding where our baseline is. So that's sort of my approach. My sense, and please anybody correct me if I'm wrong, is that generally speaking, we agree with these principles and that they're a positive thing to move forward with. Is that fair to say? Anybody? Okay. See, having that basic understanding is fundamental. Now we have a baseline we can all move forward from. So I know it doesn't seem like much from a immediate goal of this meeting, but it's consequential in moving us forward.
Can I just say, it's not so much a matter of wanting to move forward. I think we have to move forward. We've already had cases where we direly were neglect because we didn't have anything to follow. Susan could probably address those better than I, but we've had the need for this numerous occasions in the past several years. So.
In the past several months, weeks, yeah, absolutely, and it's an
Probably
ongoing,
this week.
It's ongoing, and it's going to become bigger.
Right, yeah.
There's not going to be a slowdown in the mixed-use proposals coming forward of a significant scale. So we absolutely need to make progress on this, and we will get there. But I don't want to overwhelm myself and everybody by trying to bite off more than we can initially chew. So I hope that approach makes sense, but we can certainly accelerate, and we will accelerate as we go forward. Don't get me wrong. There's going to be times where we are not running out of things to hash out here. I know we've covered basics, a lot of them. Does anybody have any questions on the concepts of things like density and FAR? How those are calculated, what those look like, what it means to increase somebody's ability to have a greater FAR. Great. Then you're already far beyond most of the groups that I work with, because even among planners, FAR is something that can take a while to get through. Let me ask the converse. Is there a density that we should not be exceeding in these type of mixed uses? And I know that's a really tricky question because
I don't think the height limit should change.
there we go. That's sort of what I was looking for. So yes, and I don't think that's necessarily what I think. There's
that limits you right there.
Exactly. And there's only so much of your lot area that you can't go over your lot lines when you go further up.
Yeah,
so
that's why I don't think FAR is an issue. I mean, 100% is 100%. So what can you do? But the residential proportion is less.
yes.
And, so there is that consideration.
There are pieces that can be
There are
tweaked.
pieces.
And we're not talking radical change. Again,
Right.
this is an incrementalist approach to revising policy is fundamentally what we're doing here. It's not a radical change. I'm not suggesting a form-based code would be a radical change. It would be a significant change from where we are. But it's not what I would consider an incrementalistic approach.
Yeah, thank you. The aspect of developing or creating a mixed-use zone, would that be an overlay to all of the existing C1, C2, C3? Or is there an opportunity to create, if you will, a development zone so that some of these could be focused in a lesser dense area of the city now that maybe we want to, I won't say move density, but expand density or that aspect?
So from again, going back to the CDP's recommendation, it did specify within the commercial districts. And within the commercial districts, what our discussions, Mary Ellen and the executive team here, have really focused on avoiding an overlay zone, because those come with a host of complexities and legal considerations. But we're more so looking at expanding the permitted uses within the commercials and saying, let me pull it up here. Sorry, bear with me.
Well, I don't know that it's expanding the uses, although Patrick made a great point that they're out of date. Some of those uses are way out of date. But it seems to me that it's getting a cohesive code for mixed use, because right now mixed use is regulated by the portion that is commercial and the portion that is residential, and it's not a true mixed-use code. I mean, I think really that's the
Much
issue.
better said. That's
Yeah.
much better said, thank you.
And is it, also, just terminology, is it commercial and non-commercial as opposed to residential?
It would be, in what we are seeking to develop, it would be a true mixed use. And so they would be considered in conjunction and be classified as a mixed use. Does that sort of make sense? So.
Getting there.
Okay. Let me see if I can find. All right, well, I'll look for this in a, for the portion.
So if I could,
Please.
so conceptually, we will be looking to add another use into the commercial districts, if that helps. So Nick is pulling up the commercial districts.
So would it be,
So yes, expanding the uses, because mixed use is allowed in our zoning code. So where conceptual, where we're looking to put it, would just be another use within the C1,
But as a general
C2, and C2.
word, multi-use.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
but it would be applicable to all commercial 1, 2, and 3?
Yes.
Correct. Yep.
And it might be tweaked, and we would consider, again, conceptually, we'd be looking to put it in each of the districts, and it might be slightly different. What is allowed in the mixed use might be slightly different in the C1, C2, and C3.
And the scale might be different as well.
Scale, thank you.
Yep.
That's the word.
So it's, do I hear you saying not necessarily one size does not fit all?
Correct.
Because we have distinctions between 1, 2, and 3.
Yes.
Precisely.
That were set for a specific reason.
Exactly.
Good or bad, they're there.
Yep.
So it would be, I think, applicable to approach it in the same manner.
Yes.
Because okay.
Yep. And so really, again, getting back to the restrictions, excuse me, on C3 about sizes and stuff, and per Susan's point earlier, we don't want to get into changing character of these districts. I don't believe that's our charge here. I don't believe anybody desires to do that. We just want to enhance flexibility and utilization and encourage integration of new opportunities for housing, really is what we come down to. So we're getting close to the end of our time here, if I can read the clock, yep. So our next meeting, do we have a date on that?
We don't.
Okay.
I thought would be, if Thursdays work for folks, if this time frame works, 10 to 12, either 3 weeks or 4 weeks from now, because we were looking to kind of coordinate with the Planning Commission meetings.
Right.
We're not having a meeting in March.
I know.
Yeah, and
I
that's.
know.
that's-
But then we're also looking for the
That means it gives you
April.
more choice choices.
Right, but for the April meeting, we're looking to have it April 12th.
Oh, yeah, right, good,
So,
good, yeah.
so I'm thinking
11th.
if just
Yeah.
3 weeks give us enough time to get everything together,
Yeah,
that would be, oh,
Whoop. You want me to pull up a calendar here? Okay, so God, it's all, yeah, tomorrow's the end of February. Wow.
So you're looking at the 20th?
20th.
Of,
ma'am.
It would probably have to be in the afternoon. They have that meeting in the morning.
Oh, that's right, we do have a meeting,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I can't,
Oh,
on the third Thursday of every month, I have a board meeting.
oh, okay. Oh, okay, then,
okay.
then that
maybe-
that
Gonna
will work.
Probably have
Maybe
people
what we'll do is circulate emails so that we can understand everybody's constraints timing-wise. I think that might be more effective to get an agreeable date
Yeah.
than trying to hash it out here. Was that okay with you,
Okay,
Mary
no,
Ellen?
that's fine, maybe we'll do a Google. Yeah,
I was
go ahead.
just going to
Sure.
mention Google as much
Yeah.
as I
Yeah,
don't like
yeah.
it as a platform.
Do a,
It's got a nice
do
doodle.
a, yeah, the Google, the doodle
Yes.
poll.
Yeah, the
Exactly.
doodle polls
Or
are great.
Google a doodle poll, one of
Yeah.
those.
Yeah.
Perfect,
One of
perfect.
those polls.
But
We'll give some
Marion,
time
are
for
you
it. Yes,
looking
ma'am.
for this group to have a third meeting before it gets presented, like, to the planning commission? Because if so, are you looking at that
Yes.
April 11th timeframe?
Well, when, yes.
Which is when our next
yes,
meeting is?
Yes.
Okay, fine.
Certainly,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we're looking at 2 dates, one in March,
Yeah.
one in early, in.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll try and schedule out within the foreseeable
be good.
future to the
That'd be
degree that we can. Yeah, so that we're at least 2 meetings ahead of
Yep.
where we are. I said that right. What am I forgetting? Anything, anybody? Yeah, please.
I just want to make one, well, maybe two comments quickly before everyone leaves so that they can think about this. I completely agree with not changing the height limitation, but then it comes down to what the exclusions might be. And you know, we shouldn't lose sight of the environmental impact and, you know, being environmentally friendly. Rooftop, you know, green spaces,
Green
I
roof
think are
systems.
something important to consider.
Absolutely.
I don't, in my personal opinion, shouldn't be included in the 42-foot height
Absolutely.
limitations. And I know the Planning Commission has struggled with this in a larger commercial context, but I would certainly like to see whatever we do encourage those types of environmental components.
Absolutely.
The other thing I wanted to say is I hope we don't get too caught up on these vague terms of character and sense of place, because that's in the eye of the beholder.
Absolutely.
And I have for years struggled with that, because when confronted by people with, oh, you're going to destroy the character, and I say, well, what is that character? I have not found a single person who can give me an answer.
Absolutely.
If you look back historically, you know, and if you attend some of the historical lectures that Paul Lovett does, I mean, what was on where the boardwalk is and what was down Rehoboth Avenue, I mean, there were large homes with horses in the yard. So what is the character we're seeking to preserve? So I just don't want to get caught up in amorphous terms, because I agree with Patrick and his analogy to the Supreme Court decision.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
And to be clear, this is simply our initial focus is on these big tenets. Once we have that fundamental agreement and can validate it with the various commissions, we're going to start getting into the nitty-gritty here. Yeah, we're going. That's really where our focus is, and we're only going to be having this higher level talk for today to next time, and perhaps going into a third. So we're going to get into the details, but we got to make sure we're all on the same page before we start trying to move forward. And the great news is I think we are, which is a terrific start in my opinion. Can't tell you the number of times I've done these type of things, and we are far apart in our positions with a group. So good. Makes my job a heck of a lot easier, and I think we're going to have a lot more effectiveness as we get into those details. So I encourage you, please don't hesitate. If you have questions on anything, whether it's process, regulations, technical details, whatever you like, email me, please. Reach out to Mary Ellen if you need as well. We're happy to answer any questions, provide any references or materials for consideration that you might need. I've got a host of resources from the American Planning Association, from like Lincoln Land Institute, from Planetizen, from all of these other places on mixed use, on forms, on design standards, all the stuff that you'd like. I can exhaust your reading material lists for the next couple of months, trust me. All that said, I really want to thank you guys, not just for being here today, but for engaging in this process, for your willingness to come and devote your time. You know, it really is appreciated, and not just by me, but by the residents here too. And I like to keep focus on that is we're not doing this work for you and I and for our everyday. We're doing this for the people who really need it, the people who can't afford to live here, who don't have an opportunity, who want to develop and help their community out, but are restricted in some fashion. So let's just keep a focus on that end result, and I think we're going to have some great success here. So again, thank you guys, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, Nick. You.
No.
Mary Ellen, should we take everything with us, including like the name tags, and bring them back next time?
You can
Or
take
no?
them with you or leave them with us.
So you'll
What's
if
your
we leave them,
preference?
then
If you
you'll
wanna
Yeah,
leave
leave
them,
them
out
and then
next time? Okay.
we'll hold on
All
to
right,
them.
let's do
It'll
Yeah.
be like a test for me.
Yeah.
How many names
Okay.
can I remember?
Yeah.
The answer's
We're
like
missing 2 people. Yes.